Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of May of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to tell you and would like to add that we are entering the most dangerous, the most difficult and maybe the most terrible part of the spring military campaign. And this part, and we're entering the ending part of this spring military campaign, which will be ended by the 9th of May, by this date. And after that, we're going to enter, or we're going to begin smoothly entering the summer part of the special military operation. This part, the spring part, is going to be ended by the 9th of May. This is a very important date for both sides, either for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. Currently, the Ukrainians are not celebrating this date; they are celebrating the victory on the 8th of May, as the most European countries. But anyway, there are still a lot of people who remembers those days of the Soviet Union times when they were celebrating the victory on the 9th of May. And both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, will try to achieve and to get success. For example, the Russians will try to finish the spring military campaign by taking Bakhmut, and they will try to do this by this date. Of course, there are not much time left before that, just 9 days, and there are still a lot of job to do in the western part of Bakhmut. From the Ukrainian side, they will try to ruin the Russians' attempts to celebrate this date by dealing some big damage to the Russian forces, maybe to the naval forces in Crimea. Maybe they will do some kind of counter-offensive operation in Bakhmut, which I don't believe that Ukrainians are going to do, or just as simple, they will try to hold Bakhmut as long as possible until this date and not to give the Russians to establish control over this town before the date. But anyway, we understand that this is going to be a fierce week with lots of updates, a lot of news and so on. And let's start. For example, today the Western sources and the Russian source confirmed, published a piece of information that as a result of some kind of attack, a guerrilla attack or some commandos attack from the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainians managed, a train was derailed in Bryansk region, and after a track or railroad track was blown up, and there was a lot of video and photo confirmation of destroyed train. And so this is another attack in this area. If you remember, during the previous months, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to cross the border. They were trying to attack the Russian energy facilities in this area, the oil refineries in this area. They captured few villages along the border. They killed few civilians. So this is a very active area, and we see that Ukrainians intensify their activity in this area because they see that the Russians don't have real defense in this area. I see that the Russians still haven't solved this issue. They, for these purposes, a few months ago, they have even changed some kind of authorities, officers in this area, but we still see that Ukrainians do have possibilities to cross this area. So currently, for example, this area of Bryansk region reminds me the same area in Kharkiv area when the Ukrainians just at one day started their counter-offensive operation, and within the week they managed to liberate the entire Kharkiv area. So this is the same situation, and believe me, if the Ukrainians were able to hide, let's say, 10,000 soldiers with armored vehicles in this area, and if they just at one day they are able to even maybe to establish control over more villages and territories in this area. But I don't know if they have such plans, but anyway, we see that the Russians have problems in this area. Very interesting updates are coming from the north of Chernihiv area. The Russians are saying, the Western countries are saying that as a result, maybe as an act of revenge from the Russian side to the situation with the train on the railroad ways, on tracks, the Russians bombed the north part of Chernihiv using the guided bombs, and as a result of those attacks, few buildings were destroyed. Maybe the Russians were discovered the Ukrainian positions in this area. They were trying to destroy maybe the headquarters, command centers of the Ukrainians who were who coordinated and maybe made this operation in life. Another interesting updates are coming from Crimea, from this area. During the daylight of the local time today, the Ukrainians sent few drones in direction of Crimea. All those drones, of course, were shut down by the Russians, and this is very interesting. For example, the Ukrainians, at least in the past, they used to, and they were trying to use the tactic when they were attacking Crimea with the drones just during the night or in the very morning, but not during the daylight time of day. And this is very interesting because possibly there are a few options, few things why the Ukrainians could act like this. And the first one is that they are in a hurry. We know that, for example, yesterday, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, the Russians made massive missile attack against Pavlograd, against this town, this logistic hub, and as a result of that attack, a lot of warehouses, ammo depots, maybe manpower were destroyed. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported today that as a result of that attack, they managed even to destroy a plant, industrial plant, which Ukrainians were using to produce fuel for Grom-2 rockets and every single type of rocket that Ukrainians can produce currently. And we know the rocket Grom-2 is it's like a Ukrainian technology, is their own designed rocket missile. The range of this rocket is more than 300 kilometers, and exactly these Grom-2 rockets the Ukrainians were using to attack Crimea and to attack the bridge that connects Crimea with the mainland, Russian land. So that plant was destroyed, and today the Ukrainians, maybe as an act of revenge, sent some drones, but all those drones were destroyed one more time. But the thing is that why did the Ukrainians take a decision to attack during the daylight? And I believe that the reason is that the Ukrainians are in a hurry, and I expect that during the upcoming night of the local time, the Ukrainians will make another attempt. They're going to be a massive attack. And currently, during the day, the Ukrainians did one thing. They were trying to discover the Russian air defense system, to spot, to discover their position, to stress a little bit the Russian air defense system, and to understand, to prepare themselves before massive attack during the upcoming night. And possibly if the Ukrainians are going to launch their massive drone attack during the night, and if they are able to deal damage, and as we discussed, the main target of the Ukrainians in Crimea is the naval fleet, the Russian naval fleet, because this is the only thing they are afraid of during the counter-offensive operation in the south. And if they're able to deal some damage, of course, then the Ukrainians will launch as fast as possible their counter-offensive operation in the south, trying to capture and to split this area in two parts. And by reaching, let's say, Berdyansk, the Russians, the Ukrainians, will start attacking, let's say, the bridge or something like this, trying to completely isolate Crimea from the Russia. And after that, they will try to capture this area, or at least they will dig in around Crimea and to start some kind of blockade of this territory of Russian Federation. We'll see. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, because we have a lot of interesting updates from the ground as well, and the most important and interesting are coming from Bakhmut, from this area. If we take a look at every single map, neither of the maps has been updated, because maybe there is some progress, but currently, and maybe we will get some updates a little bit later. But for now, as we know, as we understand, the western part of Bakhmut is almost has been almost cleared by the Russians. There are just few blocks left under Ukrainian control. The southern one in the vicinity of the MiG-17 square. This western part, the residential area with the high buildings, and the residential area between Khromova and the hospital. These 3 points the Russians are pushing. But today, for example, the Ukrainian sources published another video of explosion in the building. And as you can see, this building is located very far from the combat line, and that video was published by the Ukrainian sources. So this is another attempt of destroying the building in the western part of Bakhmut, but that attempt failed. The Ukrainians couldn't destroy the building. If you remember, during the previous week, the Ukrainians destroyed the building in this building, and that building was ruined after the explosion. Today they tried to destroy this building, but this building wasn't ruined. And the thing is, as I understand, and as you can see, this building is located very far from the combat line. And as I understand, the Ukrainians today were testing their system. Because if you remember a video or 2 videos ago, I told you that the first sign that will tell us that Ukrainians are going to leave like the Bakhmut within the next maybe hours, not even days, would be the destroying of the buildings in the western part of Bakhmut, exactly in this. So today we received the first sign of another attempt of Ukrainians to destroy the building. And as you can see, according to the geography of those explosions, the Ukrainians are trying to destroy the buildings on the Ukrainian side that are still in the Ukrainian control. And the main reason of that is that if the Ukrainians are going to leave in direction of Ivanovska, Chasov Yar, these buildings will be captured by the Russians. And from this building, the Russians will have a nice observation and nice control over the fields between Bakhmut and Kanal and Chasov Yar and Ivanovska. So this is the reason why the Ukrainians took a decision to destroy them, like to reduce the Russians' possibilities and to destroy the Russians' accuracy possibilities, future fortification possibilities in this area as well. But the thing is that, one more time, that building wasn't destroyed. So what does it mean? The Ukrainians tried to test and they have lack of explosions in this area. They don't have endless amount of explosions that they can use to destroy every single building. No, it's not true. They don't have such a number of explosions. So that's why today they were just testing their system. They were trying to understand how many explosions they need to destroy one building. Because they understand that they can't destroy every single, and now they try to analyze, understand the number and which buildings will be destroyed during the retreat process. And now I understand that not every single of these buildings will be destroyed. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes in the vicinity of Bakhmut in this area, the Ukrainians lost 330 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles including 1 tank and 1 artillery system D-30. And there are a lot of talks about Bakhmut, as we discussed. The fierce part, the last part of the spring military campaign will be finished by the 9th of May, or a little plus minus few days. And the event, the capturing of Bakhmut and the 9th of May should be the same date according to the Russian understanding. The Ukrainians have another observation of this situation. But anyway, as I understand that the Russians are not going to continue their offensive operation immediately after the fall of Bakhmut. So they will try to hold this area for a few months. Maybe they will so the thing is that they are not going to continue pushing immediately in direction of Grigorievka, Bogdanovka, Kanal Ivanovsk in this area. They will keep this situation, this configuration of the front line for the next few months. And the thing is that from the Russian perspective, this is a very nice trap for the Ukrainians, because these towns like Grigorievka, Bogdanovka, Ivanovska, and the Kanal, if the Ukrainians want to hold this area, they need always to support this town. And there are not many places where the Ukrainians are able to do this. Let's say to support Grigorievka, they need to bring supply through this part of channel, to Bogdanovka through this part, this small town using this road. And when talking about Ivanovska, the Ukrainians need to send reserves and manpower and shells using this road. And there are 4 places that the Russians need to establish control over, and they will do this, and they will establish 5 physical artillery control. And the Russians understand that during the next few months, during this positional combat on this area, the Ukrainians will have very big losses. So that's why they're not going to be in a hurry in this position. And also this is another reason why the Ukrainians are trying to destroy the buildings on the western edge of this town, just because the Ukrainians also understand that the Russians are not going to continue storming this area, at least for a few months, maybe a few weeks or something like this. And this is the reason they want to reduce the Russian possibility, because if the Russians establish control over these buildings from this area, they would navigate, target the Russians, guided bombs, and it will be much more easier. So they would just want to make Russian life more difficult during the next phase, during the beginning of the summer military campaign in this area. Now let's go to the other front lines and let's move to Donetsk area. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians are saying that there was fierce clashes in Marinka. The Russians continue storming, and some sources are saying that the Russians developed their bridgehead to the western part, to the ruins that we saw in the pictures. And I'm not sure about this piece of information, but because there are no buildings to capture, maybe the Ukrainians just took a decision not to waste their forces in this area anymore. But anyway, as a result of clashes near Marinka and near Avdiivka, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers from Marinka to Avdiivka during the previous 24 hours, 7 armored vehicles including 1 tank. The Russians attack and hit the Ukrainian position of 110th Mechanized Brigade, the most hunted as usually. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians made some kind of counter-offensive operation from the bridgehead in Toninka and Severny in direction of Vodyane. And as a result of that counter-offensive operation, the Russians were forced to step back a little bit, and the Ukrainians enter the trenches of the Russians in this area. But later, the Russians launched artillery attack, and the entire Ukrainian squad was destroyed. So we can say that there are no changes on the ground, but currently this area between Severna and Vadiana is in the gray zone. This map is not updated, but I believe that maybe within the next few days the Russians will turn the lost positions. When talking about Ugledar area, there are no changes as well, just the regular artillery duels. The Russians try and continue attacking the Ukrainian headquarters of 72nd Mechanized Brigade. Few warehouses were destroyed, and also some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians, during some normal, regular rotation process in this area, were trying to make some kind of exchange, but the Russians discovered the forces that were going for rotation and destroyed the Ukrainian convoy. We don't have any numbers of the losses of the Ukrainians, just like maybe it was some kind of speculation, but anyway, this is the event that took place in this area that we also need to discuss. When talking about Zaporozhye, there are also no changes. After destroy and after attack of Pavlograd, the main logistic hub of this area that Ukrainians were using for redeployment of the newly created brigade to the south, the number of events coming from this area was reduced to 0, because now I understand that Ukrainians try to analyze the situation and try to find another logistic solution how to redeploy their forces to the south, because they understand that this entire area, this triangle Zaporozhye, Dnipro, Pavlograd, is under full Russian satellite and any type control, and the Russians are not going to allow them to move their forces easily to the south using this area. There are clashes in Kherson, fierce fightings as well. The Russians report about destroying another Su-25, and this is maybe this. Let's take a look at the week. And I believe that during the week, yes, as you can see in the same area, the Russians, at least during the previous week, managed to shut down at least 2 Su-25, and as you can see, there are very fierce clashes in the islands between the two banks of the river. The Ukrainians are trying to capture, and the most obvious thing they're going to do just to capture and to try maybe to start marine operation in the western part of this south of Kherson area and this area. So as you can see, there is a very lot of activities in this area took place during the previous months. Now let's go to the Liman and Kupiansk front line. There are no changes in this area as well. The Russians reported that they attacked, as usually, the positions of 81st Air Mobile Brigade that located in Belogorovka and Serebryanka Forest, 58th Brigade, the same area. They managed to discover and to destroy a few commandos groups. The same situation in the Kupiansk front line. The Russians attack, as usually, the positions of 14th, 92nd Mechanized Brigade. Also, the Russians are saying that they destroyed the warehouse of 127th Territorial Defense Brigade, almost on the border with the Russian Federation. The total losses of the Ukrainians in this area were around 160 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems, but without any changes on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.